welcome everybody. My name is Derek Garrison. I'm the principal here at Dexter McCarty Middle School. I'd like to welcome everybody tonight for our gang prevention workshop. Very pleased to present this and host this tonight. I'd like to express some thanks to some different groups. First of all of you who are attending. An important issue in our community, and we're appreciative of your interest in learning more and kind of sharing your questions and concerns with us as a school, as community members, with the police. That's kind of the intent here tonight. This event takes some planning to put together, and I'd like to thank some different groups who took a part in that. First of all, the City of Gresham's Youth Advisory Committee. A while back, they had done a survey about some of the concerns that they as youth had, and gang violence and membership in gangs was one of those. So we have some members of the Youth Advisory Council in the back if you guys want to wave. So that was that group. Give them a round of applause for having the idea. So they've partnered with the East Metro Gang Enforcement Task Force and Gresham Police for making it a reality. So we'd like to thank them beforehand. A round of applause. Christine Stein, who is both a campus monitor here at Dexter McCarty, as well as the president of our PTC. So Christine Stein for making this a reality. And finally, MetroEast Communications, who you'll notice are filming. We've got a couple of cameras set up. The intent of that being that it could be used as a teaching tool for teachers and parents who can't be here tonight. So we're glad to have MetroEast Communications supporting us. At this time, I'm going to hand it off to the police, who will be taking the bulk of the presentation and sharing information. So we have Sergeant William Smith, Detective Scott Hogan, and Officer Robertson from the Fairview Police Department. So I will turn it over to them now. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Not really good with microphones, so if you can't hear me, just say something, I'll speak up. I'm Sergeant Smith. I'm the supervisor for the East Metro Gang Enforcement Team. This is Brad Robertson. He's from Fairview Police Department. He's a member of our team. We have Detective Scott Hogan over there, Lieutenant Pat Williams, who's my boss, and then the Chief, Craig Jeniger, who's my boss's boss. If you guys have any questions throughout this presentation, feel free to put up your hand. Be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. Although we're talking specifically about gang enforcement and gangs tonight, if you just have questions about law enforcement or police activity or anything like that, feel free. So the East Metro Gang Enforcement Team was organized in 2005 with a grant from the Oregon Youth Authority. So basically we have 5 officers. We have 2 Multnomah County deputies. We have 2 Gresham police officers. We have 1 Fairview officer. We have 1 sergeant, that's myself, and then we have Detective Hogan. So when you look at that, you're seeing 6 police officers that are really full-time on the road working gang enforcement or working gang issues. And that's for not just Gresham, but Troutdale, Fairview, all of East County. It's not a whole lot of police officers. Every year, or every 2 years, we have to go back to the Oregon legislature, the chief does, and ask for money. So what they'll do is they will fund us for another 2 years. So it's almost like every 2 years, we don't know if we're going to exist or not. We don't know if we're going to be around. And really, that number of 6 officers isn't really a good number either, because being a police sergeant, a lot of times, I'll spend sometimes half my week in the office doing paperwork. So a lot of the numbers you're going to see is basically from these 5 officers that are out on the road. Now think about that. Somebody takes vacation, somebody's sick, somebody gets hurt. That number just keeps going down and down. That's 5 officers dedicated to gang enforcement. It's not a whole lot. Scott, you have anything? These are our 2011 statistics. We will be putting up our 2012 statistics soon. So when you look at these numbers, you're really looking at 5 guys doing all this. And a lot of times 3 or 4 guys that are out there doing this. We do a lot of community presentations because we want to make sure that the community is involved, and you guys help us. Gang members documented, 108. And what we like to say is that for every gang member that we document, there's 4 more out there that we don't know about. Okay, we just haven't found them yet. Number of gang members contacted, 1,500 by 3, 4, 5 police officers in the year. This is our definition of a criminal street gang. It's a group consisting of 3 or more who associate with each other for the purpose of or in the process of belonging, engaging in criminal activity. So this is what the question that we get a lot. Well, how come the Elks aren't a gang? You know, what about you guys? Aren't you guys a gang? No, because the important part here is that they're engaging in criminal activity. That's the sole purpose of them being together, right? We don't get together and engage in criminal activity. The Elks don't. VFW doesn't. That's why they're not considered criminal street gangs. Definitions, difference between members and associates. The big thing here is that you can't tell the difference. You know, just the other night we stopped this kid. He's saying the last time we talked to him, he said he was with Rockwood Crew, which is a street gang. And then last night, or a couple nights ago, he's saying, oh, I'm with Pine Street. And it's like, okay, who you with? Because if I go and tell all these Pine Street guys, hey, this guy's claiming you. Is he one of you guys? And if they say no, they're going to go find this guy and retaliate against him. So he's just an associate. But you can't tell the difference. He looks like, you know, one of the Rockwood Crew guys, one of the Pine Street guys. You just can't look at him and know the difference. It's not until you go up and actually talk to them, and they'll tell you. A lot of times they'll just tell you, hey, yeah, I'm a full member. I'm not. I'm just an associate. I just hang out with these guys, whatever. These are some pictures. I'm going to show you some pictures of some gangsters, and they do come in all shapes and sizes. These are just some of the gangs that we deal with out here in East County. Some of these gangs are, you're going to recognize from TV as being nationally organized gangs or, you know, big gangs. Some of these gangs are homegrown here in Gresham, East County. They started out here, and now they're spreading out, and they're moving around. So you got the Pine Street Clique. They started down there off Pine Street between 172 and 181. Paso Robles boys started out here. Unthink Park Hustler started in Portland. Serena Loca started out here. Yam Hill Street Gang started out here. And these guys, a lot of them have moved on. They're no longer hanging out by Pine Street, but they're in Portland now, and we still see them. We still hear about them. Other gangs you see, like the Gypsy Jokers, Hell's Angels, which are, you know, the big motorcycle gangs, they do have an influence out here, and they do come out here. We've seen them out here. We've, you know, seen a couple Mongols coming out here. So this is just a small percentage of the gangs that we're going to see. And they make up everybody. You've got the Latino gangs. You've got the black gangs. You've got the, you know, white supremacist gangs. European Kindred started in the Oregon prison system. They're out here and in southeast Portland quite a bit. We're very fortunate that one of the guys on our gang team is basically a nationally recognized expert in the European Kindred. He goes back east every year to talk about them. So you can see that these gangs run the gamut. Doesn't matter what color you are, what race, where you come from, we have them out here.
With all the different gangs and how each officer is kind of assigned a different specialty of what sort of gang he's going to be assigned to investigate. For example, my partner, closer, is this better? My partner is assigned to black gangs, so that's his primary focus. I've gotten assigned to Latino gangs. I clearly don't look Latino, but I'm one of the only members that speaks a little bit of Spanish. And then he talked about Deputy Burkeen specializes in white gangs. And while all the gangs that we do deal with, they tend to get categorized a lot of times by race. That doesn't mean that like all the guys in one sect are going to be of that race. There's plenty of bleed over even into the white gangs with other races in them. But for like our own organization on the team, it helps us keep who takes what case a little bit more clearly. So just so you guys have an idea of how we end up doing our case investigations, that's how we break it up.
Just a little bit about graffiti here. There's two different types of graffiti. You've got the gang graffiti, which, this is obviously a example of, and then you have just regular tagging. Tagging is just some kid or kids grab spray can, go spray paint their moniker up on the wall, and that's tagging. Gang graffiti is usually very specific. It usually has a message. It's usually saying who they are. And this one just happens to be from Hillside, which is a group out of Hillsboro. And this is in Rockwood. So we get a lot of bleed over from Washington County, Portland, Clackamas County, Clark County. Our gangsters are going into those counties. Their gangsters are coming over here. They don't recognize boundaries. This one is down in Rockwood. This is obviously gang graffiti, Mi Vida Loca. And what happened here was this group, Mi Vida Loca, went up and tagged, rest in peace, Mocos, who is a gang member who was stabbed or killed. Another gang went up and kind of disrespected it by crossing out Mocos and PRB, and then they changed it from rest in peace to what it says. This is 54 Tiny Locos, West Side, 18th Street. So gang graffiti is going to have Roman numerals, names, West Side, South Side, stuff like that, stuff like this. Regular tagging is just going to be like some kid's name or some symbol or something like that. Kids that tag, though, we track those guys too, because what happens? You get like 3 or 4 kids together, they start tagging together, then they start fitting our definition of a criminal street gang. 3 or more individuals, sole purpose of getting together is to commit criminal acts. Tagging is a criminal act. A lot of times the tagging crews will evolve into regular street gangs because they run around, they cross out the gangsters' tags, start putting up their own tags. Next thing you know, they're fighting each other. Once they start fighting each other, they start forming up and tightening up as a gang. Anything? A lot of the stuff that you're seeing is, in fact, almost all these pictures were taken by us or the guys that have been on the gang team in the past. And the majority of them are in East County, Rockwood, Gresham, Troutdale, Fairview. Gotta love the Max line. This one has a couple of names on it. These guys, Chino and Gato. Chucky. I think that's Chucky. They'll put their names on it. One thing, too, is that a lot of times they're not really claiming territory when they put up their tags and stuff. Because and I'll get into this a little more later, but in the Northwest, gangs operate differently than they do down in California or even on the East Coast. And I know sometimes people will say that when you see stuff like this where they're going over another gang's tag, it's like, oh, it's a death wish. Now there's going to be a gang war and they're all going to fight and stuff. Usually it's just showing them disrespect. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a gang war on or people are going to go after each other. If you start seeing stuff like this on your kids' notebooks or any of these tags that I've shown you, if you start seeing it on their notebooks, backpacks, hats, a lot of the guys will put it on the underside of their hat, on the bill. You start seeing that, then you might have an issue. A lot of this memorabilia is what we've come across. So if you start seeing your kid doing something like this, putting Playboys or some name on their hat, if they start wearing some specific hat, like the Houston Astros, for example. Houston Astros hats and symbols are a big sign for the Hoovers. So your kid is either becoming a huge fan in the Houston Astros or they may be, hanging out with the wrong people. Usually what we'll do is we'll ask them, hey, who plays what position for this team? I don't do it because I don't know sports. But these guys that, watch baseball, basketball, and do all that stuff, they'll ask them. And a lot of times these guys wearing all this athletic garb have no idea what, who's playing what position. If your kid's room starts looking like this, and I'm not talking about the mess because this is actually a picture of my kid's room. No, I'm just kidding. If it starts looking like this with all the graffiti on it, then you might have an issue. They start wearing things like this out at night, in memorial of his amigo. They start writing things like this, or they start coming up with nicknames for themselves, or their friends start calling them something by these names. Little Joker. I think there's like 300 Little Jokers in East County and 400 Sleepies. They're not very creative. But if you start seeing stuff like this on your kids' notebooks, they start doing it on their desktops, something like that, you might want to start thinking about it. Belt buckles. Now, back in the day, everybody said, red and blue, Crips and Bloods. All the gangsters wear this color and all the gangsters wear this color. Well, they started getting smart, and they started changing that. Why? Because police, you see a guy all dressed down in red, that's a clue, and we want to go talk to that person. So they stopped dressing down like completely in red. Now they started getting smarter. Belt buckle, 13. Shoelaces, hats, but they won't be completely dressed down in one color. You have anything?
One of the other things that they'll do, or that I've seen, is that some of the schools that actually have dress code standards, where you're not supposed to wear certain clothes that they might think are affiliated with a gang, they'll wear consistently a different color than their gang, but they'll still be identify themselves at school in a gang. So, for example, if you're not supposed to wear like an LA Dodgers cap with the blue jersey and all blue shoes, all that, the schools might be able to say, no, we don't want them to wear that. But then what the gangs will do is they'll pick a different color, like they might pick green or purple. And while they go to school, they'll wear those colors. So it's just something else to be aware of.
So, closer. Normally, I don't need one of these. In case you're thinking, hey, my kid goes to school here, and this isn't at this school, I think at the end, when we're done with this, the school's going to put up a display of a bunch of this kind of stuff that they sees from students at this school. So it is here, and it's important to be aware of it. And like we just said, one of the things that we've identified with the gang members is, the whole idea of color association. That's something that they used to self-identify, and regardless of whether it's colors or numbers or whatever else, as soon as we start picking up on it and put that information out to the staff and to the parents, they're going to change because they want something that's kind of unique to them. Regardless of which color they associate with, though, one of the important things to remember is that these guys are criminal street gangs. They're involved in crimes. Even the taggings here aren't so much a declaration of a specific territory as a challenge to another gang that's in an area. Most of the gangs that we see out here are going to have, some kind of other criminal enterprise that they're involved in. When they hit the level that we're paying attention to them, it's not specifically just because they're going out and doing these taggings. Many of our gangs are involved in drug activity and drug sales. We'll see different groups that are set up that will have market areas in different parts of the city. And they may even coexist with other gangs that are out there. For example, we may have a black gang that operates on a certain street corner and sells pharmaceuticals or pills. On that same street corner, you may see a Latino gang that's selling marijuana there, and maybe even a white supremacist group that comes down and sells methamphetamine. Where we have a lot of problem in our drug trade is at the point that we identify one of these groups and we go out there and we arrest them. That person comes off the street for a short period of time, and the other groups that are left there see that and see that there's a vacuum there, and the customers keep showing up because they're used to buying that stuff at that street corner. So they'll figure out, I can pick up those customers, and they'll start venturing out into pills or weed or amphetamines. And then when that guy gets back out of jail, he wants his corner back, and that's where we have these issues of violence that pop up.
Just real quick, we'll go over some tattoos. Usually when you see something like this where it's got a calendar on it, usually it's their way of symbolizing that they've done prison time. Mi vida loca, the 3 dots, usually by the eye or in the web of the thumb and the forefinger. Gangsters like tattoos. And I'm not saying all tattoos are bad. They're just more prevalent in society. A lot of our Sereno or Latino gangsters will have this, the smile now, cry later tattoo somewhere on them. So unless your kid is really, really into the arts and theater and stuff like that, if they show up with one of these, probably something going on there. And this one says Florencia 13, which is out of California. This guy's proud. He's got it on his chest. Was this guy's name Wolfman? Harry? Something like that. 18th Street. Obviously, he's got a tattoo of a gangster on his stomach. And then, when we stop him and we talk to him and he tells us, no, I'm not a gangster. It's like, okay. This guy didn't get his Smile Now, Cry Later tattoo finished, but he's in the process. He's got his rip for Don Miguel. This is more of a East Coast folk tattoo. I don't know where we got this one. A lot of girls will put it on the back of their neck because what they'll do is a lot of times the females are the breadwinners in the gangs. They're the ones that get the housing. They're the ones that have the jobs. So when they go in for a job interview and they have, a tattoo on the back of their neck, they can just drop their hair, cover it up. Nobody knows. They go to work. They're good. When they get home and they get into the life, they pull up their hair, and then they start representing. Houston Astros, once again. Hoovers. Yeah, I think if my kid showed up with I probably shouldn't say that. YSG. So I'm not saying don't go out and get tattoos, but if your kids start showing up with tattoos like this, or if you start seeing tattoos like this on people in your neighborhood. The weapons. Most of the time when we talk about weapons, everybody's thinking of guns and knives and stuff like that. I'm going to show you some other weapons up here that we commonly run across and that most people wouldn't even think of. So we have our guns, and these are guns that we've taken off the street. They like to pose with their guns. They'll put this on Facebook. It used to be MySpace, but now they're putting it on Facebook and stuff like that. More guns. And then these are some of the more uncommon weapons. When we see a bunch of guys walking down the street with a bunch of baseball bats and they're walking to the park, and they seem to be dressed down in certain attire, and we stop them and they say, hey, we're just going to play softball. And it's like, really, where are the gloves and the balls? You all have bats, but, this thing, come on, right out of the Middle Ages, right? It's a mace. That is a weapon. That could, potentially injure or kill somebody. More guns and knives. Screwdrivers. Most people don't think of screwdrivers as a weapon. A lot of times these guys will carry the screwdrivers on them because it's not against the law to carry a concealed screwdriver, right? But they use them to stab each other. I think we've even had a homicide where they put one through a guy's head. These little bats that you used to get at the Beavers baseball games and stuff like that, or little billy clubs, they carry those around because they're easy to conceal, especially in all their baggy clothing and stuff like that. This thing right here is, it's a pool ball wrapped in a bandana. And then what they do is they'll stuff it in their pocket. So all you see is their bandana hanging out, and then they're representing. But if it comes time to fight or anything like that, they pull it out, and that's a weapon. A lot of times they'll put combination locks in there and other items, but that's a weapon. And then, of course, back to guns. These are some of our white supremacists. I think I counted they had one bolt action, one shotgun, one .22, and one lever action. And then you look up on the wall and they've got more. And this is stuff that they post on Facebook. Drugs. Like Scott was saying, the majority of the gangs out here in the Northwest, they're in business of dealing drugs and more lately in the business of prostitution. So unlike, down in California or wherever where they're concerned about their turf and their neighborhood and their area, up here it really doesn't matter. They're concerned about their business. As long as you're not messing with their business, they don't care. We have an apartment complex that has Crips, Bloods, European Kindred, which are the angry white supremacist guys, and there's Latinos in there too. And they all get along because they're not messing with each other's business. We have crack cocaine out there. And it seems like each gang, they kind of specialize, like Scott was saying, a lot of Latinos are into marijuana and heroin. A lot of the black gangsters are into cocaine. The white supremacist guys are still using methamphetamines. Marijuana. So their big business is dealing drugs and, like I said, prostitution. Prostitution's getting huge now. And it's not just, the huge gangs and stuff like that. I think it was, they had a guy that was like 17 or 18 that was convicted of prostitution. One was 16, was prostituting out another 16-year-old girl. And that's where it starts. I was at a gang meeting, and they were talking about how McLaren, which is the school for boys, is turning into basically a school on how to be a pimp and prostitute. Because I think just before this last decision, pimps were going to jail for like 2-3 years or getting out, But now, I don't know if you guys saw it in the Oregonian where that one guy went away for life. That's a good deal. Hand signs, you'll recognize some of these photos, some of the areas in these photos. They don't really throw up a whole lot of hand signs, and really I can't tell you what they mean. But this one, these brown pride Chicanas, anybody know where that's at? What's that? 181st and Burnside, yeah, there you go. There's the Pizza Hut in the background. But these girls were a locally grown gang. More tattoo. A lot of these photos where they're throwing up these signs and stuff, we'll stop them and we'll talk to them and we'll just say, hey, can we get a picture with you guys? And they'll be like, yeah, and then they'll pose and throw up their hand signs, and sometimes we'll get an officer in there to pose with them. But we're using that information so that we know, we're documenting them. Hey, this person's a gangster. These guys, all I can see is the X111. I don't know what these guys are saying. Schools and recruiting. It's kind of like Sesame Street. One thing doesn't belong, one thing doesn't look like the other. Well, in this case, it's two guys right here. A lot of times what we're hearing from the SROs, the school resource officers, is that these guys will just walk into the schools, and then they just, during lunchtime or something, they'll start recruiting, just start showing off their tags or their tattoos and stuff like that, and they're recruiting. So this is kind of how people get into a gang. You got your jump in, which is the most common, which is basically, I want to be in a gang, I want to be in your gang, so now all these guys get to beat me up for like 30 seconds or a specified time limit, and I have to fight back and get beat up. And a lot of times we'll hear it where we'll get a call as police officers, yeah, there's a fight at this park or at this corner, there's like 8 guys beating up one guy. Well, more than it could be 8 strange guys beating up one strange guy, but a lot of times it's a gang initiation. The whole sexton, that thing really, that's kind of old school. That was back when girls weren't in their own gangs, they were property of a gang. And then what they would have to do to get into that gang, is to sleep with all the guys or something like that. I don't think the girls like that, so what they did is they started forming their own gangs around Pride Chicanas. Hey, we don't want to do that. We're going to start our own gang. And the girls are just as lethal as the guys. A lot of times they're the ones carrying the weapons because male police officers are apprehensive about searching female, suspects. So a lot of times what we do is we'll get a female over to search the female. They'll have the dope on them. They'll have the weapons on them and just walk away. They may have to do what's called doing dirt. They'll commit a criminal act, steal a car, go beat someone up, tag something, just commit a crime in the name of the gang. And then the last one is that, they're born in, they're heredity. Would that be the right word? They're hereditary. Yeah. Dad's a gangster. Uncles are all gangsters. Brothers are gangsters. Guess what? I'm going to be a gangster. I don't have to get jumped in. I don't have to get beat in. None of that, because I'm coming in on the cloud of my relatives. And what's nice is a lot of these guys will videotape it with their cell phones and then put it on Facebook. Yeah, or YouTube. Or if we do catch them and we look at the phone, then we see, like, hey, all these guys are involved. Girls are doing it now. It's a girl gang. They're going to beat each other in. Look at this kid in the background. I mean, he's actually smiling. He thinks it's funny. And what chance do you think that guy has? I've gone into houses where I've looked at the photo albums of these families, and all the pictures they have in their photo album is dad's in prison, dressed down, throwing hand signs. These are my uncles that are in prison throwing hand signs. I mean, what chance do you think this kid has? They're dressing him up like a gangster. He can barely walk. Same thing with this guy. Right now, we're saying that there's 125 documented criminal street gangs in East Multnomah County alone. 650 active documented gang members. But like I said, just because we documented somebody, there's probably 4 more out there that we don't know. We're constantly finding new guys out there. We're finding new gangs because they're evolving, they're changing, they're moving. 7 cops. Really, it's 5 with Detective Hogan and myself being 6 and 7. But those 5 guys are the ones that are out there all the time.
We're getting close to kind of wrapping it up and going to the question and answer session. I hope you guys have questions and that you'll ask them, because chances are real good if you want to ask it, somebody else in the crowd wants to ask the same question. They're just a little afraid, which I don't get because we're not scary people. I do want to talk to you a little bit, though, about this whole idea of people coming into the schools or out on the streets and recruiting. Because the reality is that these gang members, when you see these guys standing up here and they're posing with the guns and they've got the drugs, that does not happen overnight. Okay, that is a process. Gang members are made. Even the ones that are born into certain families, they just grow up, they don't realize other options that they have out there. But this is going to start some of the transition periods that we see where kids are most at risk if they're not coming up in a family, is that transition from grade school into middle school, and then from middle school into high school. And I'm assuming that you're all here tonight because you've got a son or a daughter that fits into that category. And the reason why they're most at risk at that point is because they're changing peer groups. They're having this pressure to kind of grow up. They don't have maybe the same friends, same comfort level that they had before. So what gang members will do is that they'll be in the schools, they're already identified, they're their own group, and nobody wants to mess with them because they're scary, and if you take on one of them, they're going to come beat you up. And they will go out there, and they will find that youth that's out there, whether it's a girl or a boy, that doesn't really belong to any other group. And these kids will look at them and say, I'm not sure that I'm really down with all that other stuff that they're doing. I mean, mom and dad have talked to me, and I don't want to do drugs, but I'm tired of getting picked on around the school. I want to belong to somebody that's going to have my back, that'll stand up for me. And those kids will notice this kid over here that's looking at them, and they'll approach them, and they'll talk to him, and they'll say, hey, why don't you come hang out with us at lunch? Why don't you spend some time with us? And then that kid kind of becomes cool by association through the school. Other people leave him alone. Message goes out from the gang members, this kid's one of us, leave him alone. And they bring him in slowly, and they get used to him being around. And slowly they expose him to some of the other stuff that they're doing. Maybe they start partying, and all of a sudden they're providing your child alcohol and or drugs. Marijuana is a great gateway drug. Okay, they'll take that step, they show them marijuana, and then from marijuana they'll get them to move on to something else. Or if the kid wants to move on, whoever's supplying the marijuana can usually get them that other substance. Eventually, though, after they've been partying with these people, they'll tell them, hey, you've been hanging around with us for a while. Now it's time to put in some work. It's time to do the dirt. And they won't start off by putting a gun in their hand. they'll start off by saying, tonight we're going to go out and we're going to make some money. We're going to sell some stuff on the street. And your job is just, you stand out on the street corner, and if you see the cops coming, you just whistle real loud. Okay, that's all you got to do. So now all of a sudden they're taking your child and they're involving him in criminal activity. Or maybe it's, we're going to tag up. One of our homies got killed. You're going to come out with us. We're going to tag up. You're going to be the lookout. Or you're going to be the one that gets to put a name up on a wall today. And at the end of this, we're going to give you a nickname, and your nickname's going to go up on the wall. But the reality is that eventually, after maybe 2 years, that child that came to the school that would never have done that kind of stuff will be so committed to this group because they reflect the same values at that stage that this kid believes in, that gang leader can do that. He can go to him, he can put a gun in his hand, and he's going to say, tonight we're going to go out, and I want you to shoot somebody that you have never met before. We're going to go into this area, and we're going to find a member of a rival gang, and we're going to shoot them because they messed with one of our guys. And the reality is I've investigated that crime. I've been there when a 25-year-old puts a gun in a 16-year-old's hands and tells him, shoot that guy because he's part of a rival gang. And that kid does it because he is so committed to his group at that point. Okay? They do that. They specifically go out there and they recruit these kids and they try and carve them out and separate them from what your influences are. So that by the end of the day, they're only identifying with the other members of the gang.
One thing about drugs that we forgot to mention and that I'd really like to bring up is the prescription drug use. A lot of kids, what we're seeing now is a lot of kids are taking prescription medication from parents that they may have in the bathroom. They're taking them to school or they're taking them out on the street and selling them. So, just be aware of the prescription meds that you have in your house. If it's old or you're not using it, flush it, get rid of it, turn it in, do whatever. But don't, temptation doesn't need to be there. Another thing, too, is if you have any questions or concerns about your kids, one thing that we used to do is when I was a school resource officer at HB Lee, if I had a kid that I suspected was starting to get involved in gangs or something like that, what I would do is I would contact the gang team. That's back when Scott used to be one of the uniform members. I'd get a hold of these guys and I'd say, hey, look, I'm really concerned about this kid. I think he's going the wrong way. And so what we would do is we'd set up a home visit. We'd come out to the kid's house and we'd talk to the parents and say, hey, we have these concerns about your kid. And then a lot of times we'd go into their bedroom. And it would almost be like that picture I showed you. They'd have graffiti and tagging and stuff all over the wall. Or they would have the clothing and stuff, and the parents would have no clue. And I'm not, it's not bad on the parents, I'm a parent. I have kids in high school. We're working, we're busy, doing a lot of stuff. And all we were trying to do is to educate the parents. Hey, you need to keep an eye on your kid because they're starting to go down the wrong road. So that's available to you. If you think that your kid is probably hanging out with the wrong people, you're seeing stuff in their room that you're not sure of, anything like that, just get a hold of us. We'll be more than happy to come out there and take a look and let you know. A couple of phone numbers for you, the gang tip line and the non-emergency number. If you see anything in your neighborhood, we address neighborhood issues. There was a summer where they were saying that gangsters were roaming up and down the street. So what did we do? We go after them. We went and hung out in the neighborhood, and we actually found them and talked to them, and we try and make things better. And there's additional contact numbers on the back of the handout. Do you guys have any questions? Sure, go ahead, buddy.
Has there ever been a time where you guys really had to stop a gang war? Like you actually had to get involved, like gangs were actually shooting guns at each other and you actually had to stop it?
We haven't been in the middle of it, but part of what we do when we go out and we contact these kids that are involved in gangs, realize that we're dealing with the entire spectrum. We're getting kids that are just starting in, we're getting kids that have been there for a long time, and we're getting friends of those kids too. So I know of multiple times where we've been called and someone will call us anonymously and say, look, some really bad stuff happened today, and these two groups are supposed to get together tonight in, say, Vance Park. And more likely than not, there's going to be a shooting. When we get those calls, we make sure that we're in Vance Park, and we may see 2 different groups show up. But because we're there, it doesn't happen. Our goal is to try and be preventative and be ahead of it. It's a whole lot easier to stop shootings that don't occur.
We do occasionally run across that. I happen to be, in one point in my career, less than here to the parking lot away from somebody that was shot with a shotgun. And they knew that the police were at the end of the block, and they still walked out and they shot a guy. And it was about 20 feet from the front of a Safeway store. And there was probably 4 or 5 police officers. We heard the shot, but by the time we turned around, the guys were running away.
Yeah, I was, excuse me, I was wondering, why is there a rise in prostitution, and what is the profile of the girls who are getting sucked into that?
In addition to that, can you maybe talk a little bit about the human trafficking element?
Sure, and they're kind of both tied together. The reason for the increase in prostitution, like I said, gang members are about making money. Okay, they're about supporting their lifestyle, but if they can do it by minimizing their risk and their exposure, they'll do it. There's a certain markup on illegal drugs. When they go out, they're going to spend X amount of money to get the drug that they get, and then most of the time they're going to sell it for 1.5 to 2 times what they got it for out on the street. But it's a lot more exposure for them because they're getting one big chunk, and then they got to make 30 transactions in order to get their money back. What they've discovered is that instead of trafficking in drugs, and drug trafficking is automatically a felony offense. So if we catch them out on the street and they have a certain amount of drugs, they have scales, they have money, they have drug records, we can charge them with distribution of a drug. Not just possession, which is a felony, but also distribution. So what some of the gangs identified probably 7-8 years ago, we started to see the trend, was that they would go out and these young girls that were hanging around with them, getting drugs and basically exchanging drugs for sex, they started putting the girls to work out on the street. Because if the girl got busted, then it was just a misdemeanor charge on the girl. More often than not, they were just getting a ticket and getting let go. Very rarely did we see any Johns that were getting busted. So the exposure was real small. The girls wouldn't talk about the pimps that were prostituting them. And then the girls would come back with the money. They'd get a small amount of that and maybe some drugs and be allowed to stay at the house, while the bulk of the profit goes into the gangster's pocket. He has very little exposure, very little risk. So profit margin went way up, and the exposure, the risk went way down. In order to successfully prosecute those individuals for compelling prostitution, which is what the charge is, we have to be able to prove that they're directing the activities of those that are actually engaged in the prostitution. And many times it's difficult to do that because the girls won't cooperate in the investigations. These are, again, the same process that they use to identify other gang members. They do that to identify these girls. They find these disaffected young girls, they bring them in, they take them out shopping, they buy them stuff, they bring them into this lifestyle, and they're telling them, okay, now it's time to go to work. And going to work is engaging in sexual activity for money.
A really good documentary I just watched the other day, and I recorded it, and I'm going to make my 16-year-old daughter watch it. It's called Sex in the Suburbs, and it's about how these people go out and get these young girls. And sometimes it's young girls recruiting young girls. They'll make friends with them at school, they'll bring them over, and then they snatch them up. Next thing you know, they're involved in prostitution. Any other questions?
It's not really a question, but because I had a little experience with a foster daughter, totally knew nothing about gangs and all that kind of stuff when I got her. I learned over time that, especially girls, I don't know if guys do it, but they'll have 2 names. And they're not like Joker. They're like real names. So if you have a girl or somebody who's talking about a friend, and you know one friend, but you never met the other friend, you might need to put 2 and 2 together. It might be the same person because they don't want their real name out there when it comes to the gangs and stuff. And also, I wouldn't buy her bandanas, so she wanted to buy scarves, and then she would wear them like bandanas and get, take her picture all thug-like and everything. So you have to watch for kind of odd little things like that.
She's exactly right. As a parents, the parents and teachers are the ones that see the changes in your child's behavior first. You're going to notice these things, and they change by degrees. Okay, the one thing that I would like to tell you, I commend you for being here tonight because you're taking that first step of being involved, but continue to be involved. Know where your children are at. Know who their friends are. If you allow your children access to electronic media, Facebook, they have a cell phone, know what's going on with that. I will tell you that I've talked to a lot of kids and a lot of parents. The child will have a cell phone, and the parent will tell me, well, I don't go into the cell phone because that's his property. My question is, who pays the bill? And the parent will tell me, I pay the bill. And I'll say, well, why aren't you looking at what's going on there? Well, I don't want to intrude on that. I want to be my daughter's friend. My answer to that is, your daughter probably has 100 friends. They have at best 2 parents. Which role do you think you should be in?
Okay, so we have our children and we're protecting them, and we have our friends who are telling us that we're being overprotective and they're being judgmental and they're being a pain. We all have this problem, and if you haven't had this problem, you're not paying attention. How do we convince our children, without bringing you all into our homes, that their friend is not their friend? Their friend is trying to suck them in to get them into trouble, with them paying attention instead of saying, Mom, you don't know what you're talking about. You've never been there. You have no clue. Yada, yada.
That's a tough question because I've never had that issue, because when my kids have brought that up, it's like I know exactly what I'm talking about because I deal with it every day. So
They're honestly probably afraid to get out of, they're in a situation that they don't understand. Yeah, Mom, you're right. You might know what you're talking about, but I'm not going to tell you that. So how do you convince them that they need to reach out for somebody else's help?
You tell them because I said so.
If your children are having that much of an influence from people that are negative, I would limit the amount of time that they have access to those people. As a parent, you've got to maximize the amount of time that you have with your children, and you've really got to familiarize yourself with the people that they're running around with. And I would engage those people that your kids are hanging out with as much as you can, so you can learn about the activities that they're doing, get to know their parents, and limit the amount of time that they're spending with them.
You have to know where your child is and who they're with. I don't care if they're in high school. You have to know what they're doing. You have to meet those people. And you have to start when they're little. And you can't wait till you see a danger sign, because part of it is all that foundation you lay first. And probably all of you are doing that because you're here. It's the ones that aren't here that aren't probably doing that.
And again, being a parent is not being a friend. I mean, that's not that you're not nice to your children. I've got a great relationship with my children, but I'm their parent first. And their friends are their friends, and you've got to lead by example with those kids.
The other thing is, and you brought it up, it's kind of what they're doing, and the lieutenant talked a little bit about it. Our kids are going to want to find other peers that they can relate to. So encourage them. I think we've got some people that are here that are going to talk about it. Encourage them to find acceptable peer groups that are here. I know that everybody's dealing with budget constraints, but our schools are full of after-school activities that involve drama, that involve sports, that involve all different kinds of things that are out there that they can find that same group of people. I know when my kids were in school, one of the things that I encouraged them in was a music participation program. And when they made that transition from middle school to high school, my youngest was thinking, hey, I'm not quite so interested in music anymore. And there's other electives that he wanted to do in high school. I encouraged him to stay with it for the first year, or at least the first part of that first year, because I knew that making that transition to high school, he'd have a peer group that he had already identified with, that he knew. So when he went into a scary environment that is high school as a freshman, that he already had a group of people that he was familiar with and that knew him.
We have another question over here.
Yeah, you guys have mentioned quite a few different illegal activities that gang members participate in, but you didn't mention, I don't hear much about burglaries and robberies. Is that not so big for them anymore, or what?
Actually, it is. I don't know if you guys remember watching the flash mobs on the news. Yeah, those guys were referred to and were actually documented as a gang. They were using media, Twitter. That's how old I am. I can't even say it. Twitter and stuff like that to organize these flash mobs and flash robs. And they called it apple picking, where they would get on the Max line. If somebody had a Apple iPhone or iPad or something like that, then they would just flash rob. They'd beat them up and steal it. So, they are still involved in burglaries, robberies, and stuff like that. Some of the old standby crimes.
So the question was, the pants hanging down, does that have anything to do with gangs?
I hate that, personally. And when my son was, I think, 13, he started wearing his pants a little low. And I told him, dude, every time I can see your underwear, I'm going to give you a wedgie. And he stopped. I bought him a belt, and guess what? He wears his pants like a normal human being now. But no, I think that's more of just a fashion statement. Kids are, wearing their pants. I don't mind if the gangsters wear saggy pants, because when they try and run from us, their pants fall down. It's easier to catch them. I'm just kidding. But but no, they're all doing it. But, like Scott was saying, be a parent. I wouldn't let my kid do that. So, any other questions? And it doesn't have to be just specifically gang-related. It could be about anything, in law enforcement or police work.
How do they get a hold of all the drugs? Do they just steal them, make them, grow them?
All of that. And they have adults that usually put it in their hands. But we get kids that are, like the sergeant mentioned, kids that are taking mom and dad's prescription drugs from the house. We have organized gangs that are going out to some of our medical marijuana grows that are growing under the medical marijuana law, and we'll do robberies at those houses. We have groups that are part of organized groups. They're the distribution end. Somebody from Mexico will drive up here with a couple kilos of cocaine or of heroin. And then the street distributors are the gang members that put it out. And a lot of times they're selling, they're making a small profit, and then they get to hang on to some of that. Because if they're selling it, they're probably using it recreationally also.
So since we're in middle school, what would you guys say the average age of a gangbanger is? And at what age should parents start getting concerned?
I think Scott was right in that once kids start hitting middle school, that's when you're going to want to start keeping an eye on your kids. But when I was a school resource officer at HB Lee, I would see kids that were in 6th grade, and they were hardcore little gangsters. I mean, no doubt about it. There was no question. They were a gangster, and that's what they wanted to do. But we also have gang members that are in their 30s and 40s, old school guys that are, their tattoos are a lot more faded, but they're gangsters too. I think I don't know about the average age, but I'd say most of the ones that we run across are in their 20s.
The typical kid that you're going to see in middle school is going to be recruited. He or she is going to be recruited by family and friends, and they're going to be recruited from 6th to 9th grade. They don't full-fledged jump in until they're around a freshman, sophomore in high school, and then they start getting active. When they get to the latter part of high school, if they're still in high school or they drop out, is when they really get serious, and that's when they start doing the home invasion robberies and the street robberies and things like that when they're 16 to 18 years old. But you should definitely be aware of what your kids are doing in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, because that's where the peer pressure is going to be the most. And the peer pressure is going to be coming from their friends, but more importantly, their friends' siblings, their friends' older brothers, the cousins, the nephews, the uncles that these guys are all talking about. When they go to their friend's house and they see the pictures on the walls of the guys that have been in prison, they don't look at that as scary. They look at that as a status. And when their friends are telling them about how great their uncle is, they start seeing that as being a status. And that's when they're most influenced on whether or not they're going to take that road to go down and be a gangster, or if they're going to get a job and stay in school. So it's most important at this point in their lives that you're as active as possible.
In a middle school setting, what is a characteristic that is the most prevalent to look for versus like a wannabe, sometimes they'll wear the clothes or something. Is there something that stands out?
Okay, just so that you know, as far as we're concerned, there is no such thing as a wannabe. If a kid is purporting a certain lifestyle to us, as far as we're concerned, he's in it. It's just what level of he's in it are we dealing with, or she's in it. So if they're out there and they're dressing down and they're throwing signs and they're doing all this stuff that gathers the attention, they're in it. As far as the level, quite honestly, the level that you guys are most effective at as parents and as teachers are when they start to identify with that. When you see your son or daughter wants to start watching gangster-style films and identify with that lifestyle, when you see, as a teacher, homework getting turned in with these little taggings on it, or as a parent, when it comes home and a teacher's made a comment on a paper and you see these little things in the notations where they're tagging, that's where you're going to see it the most. Because if you don't catch it there and identify with what it is, by the time they've hit the stage where they're dressing all in blue and look like a Smurf and all their friends are in blue, you're just going to figure, well, that's what the friends are doing too. Okay, so it's important to catch it at the beginning. And it's also easiest to stop that activity then.
Look for the clothing and look for them making little gestures on photographs. You're going to see that with a lot of kids that are really trying to act out. And at the last second at that photograph, they're going to lift that finger up, they're going to lift that hand up, or they're going to be wearing the clothes. And you're going to see it on their homework, on those papers. Go through their backpacks. And if they don't like it, tough. Go through them. Look through those, page 10, page 20 in their notebooks to find all the doodles. And that's different from typical doodling. They're very characteristic of the gang signs that you're seeing up there with the simulated dollar signs and things like that. Look for those. Pictures of guns, they love to draw those. So be aware of all that.
Well, excuse me. My question is, okay, so we start to see that. Then what? Because when we...
Call one of the officers. They'd be more than happy. And just because you call a police officer doesn't mean that the police are going to come and arrest your children, okay? Call and they can explain a lot of what this stuff is, okay? And they can help influence them as well. And the kids are going to know, wait a minute, my mom or dad is willing to call the police and come and talk to me. It makes a huge impact.
One of the things I wanted to talk about real quick, and I usually don't get involved in their presentations because they're the experts, but as the police chief, I'm entrusted with protecting our community and deciding how we do that. To me, gangs is a very important product of keeping our city safe. 4 years ago, I came up here to be police chief, and I came from Southern California. My first 7 years in law enforcement was in the city of LA. So I'm thoroughly familiar with Bloods, Crips, Florencia, Southside 18th, all of them. So when I came up here 4 years ago and I heard about East Metro Gang Enforcement Team, it was like, yeah, right, Portland, gangs. But I got to tell you, the gangs up here are every bit as violent, as knowledgeable, as dealing in dope, prostitution now, or the human trafficking, as any of the gangs down in Southern California. So our gang team is funded by the state. Every biennium, I'm going down to Salem, testifying in front of the Public Safety Ways and Means Committee to keep our gang funding. Because we all know what's gone on in Gresham. I mean, we could talk ad nauseum about the lack of resources and the budget cutting and everything that's gone on the last 4 years. So this East Metro Gang, MGET, is such an integral part of keeping our community safe. And here's where it comes in that it's important, is that Portland Police Bureau is 8 times our size. They have over 800 officers. I'm at 120 police officers for the city of Gresham. For a city of 125,000 people or 107,000 people, we're at about 1.08 officers per thousand. So Portland, you know, there's 3 things that have changed kind of Gresham, and I can go into a couple of them, but one of them is the gentrification of North and Northeast Portland. You know what that means? That they've changed the city by mowing down Columbia Villa and building up new condos. And so the diversity, the gangs, and the issues are starting to move east. So when Portland, when they have a problem in a certain apartment complex or a certain area, what do? Because Portland is the big blue monster to the west of us, they can flood it with 50 or 60 officers. How many people they say is on the MGET team? 6 on a good day we'll have out there. We're holding that line at 162nd. But one of the things you have to think about is that the gang unit is not just about putting people in jail. Gang enforcement is a 3-component thing: prevention, intervention, and enforcement. Prevention is what we're doing here tonight, to try to give all of you some education, some insight, what to look for with your kids, what to look for with your kids' friends, and the peer groups that they're hanging out with. Intervention is what Sergeant Smith talked about when he was an SRO and alerted MGET, and they're going to the houses and making contact with the parents of the kids that are vulnerable, that are in that age group of 9 to 14, something like that. So that's the intervention part, that we're trying to intervene before they get involved in gangs. We're trying to break that cycle. And coming from LA, you know, the sergeant mentioned that he's seen 30 and 40-year-old gangbangers. I saw 60-year-old veteranos that have been in and out of prison their entire life. It's grandfather, son, you know, grandson are all in the same gang, in the Hispanic gangs and stuff down in California. So the third part of that kind of triangle is the enforcement. I'm very much a law and order police chief, that I believe at certain times there's people that have to go to jail and pay a penalty for the crime that they did. So the enforcement is very much an important part, but you have to do them equally. And what the gang enforcement team is doing tonight, they do probably 30 times a year at churches, at civic groups, at all of this, to educate the community. What you don't know is that intervention part when they're going to these homes. And I've talked to these guys, and hey, what are you guys doing tonight? We're going out knocking on doors tonight. That's what they're doing. That's an important part of it too. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that 3-component thing, and you have to have all 3 parts. And I'm telling you, if we don't get gang funding, again, we lose this valuable service. So if you have your legislators, the representatives, the state senator for the area, make a phone call to them and tell them how important it is that they're on the bandwagon to get our gang funding again. Because I'm going down in a couple of weeks to testify again. Give them stats, talk about how important it is that we hold that line at 162nd.
I do have a question. You know, I've seen the shoestrings where the shoes are tied together and thrown over the lines, and sometimes you see like different colored light bulbs on people's front porches. Do any of that signal anything, or are there any other like outward things that we would notice that might actually be a signal that there's drug activity or something going on? It is old school, but you still see it. So I was trying to figure out, does it still mean something, or does it mean anything?
I don't
or
think
the different colored lights on the front
I don't think
porches?
the shoes mean much anymore, but the porch lights, that could be a variety of different things. A lot of it is just decorative. The biggest thing that you should be aware of if you're looking for drug activity, looking for those guys that are walking, especially in an apartment complex. What we routinely see is if the guys are in marked cars, there's going to be a sentry. There's going to be that kid roaming the blocks on a bicycle that's looking for cops. They're going to be looking for police officers in unmarked cars. They're looking for somebody that's been sitting there for a long period of time because they know police have to do surveillance to get enough information to write a search warrant. So they're going to be looking for that person. So you need to be aware of people just milling around watching, and those are the lookouts. And a lot of times, if people are dealing very heavily, like crack cocaine, for example, the person will only be able to escort them up to the house. And that's a typical thing. But the porch light thing, that can be, sometimes it's used, but not that much.
Any other questions?
All right, so one of the ways that we have found in middle schools, high schools, anytime you have kids that are involved in activities, it's going to keep them in a positive, active environment where they can get mentors, where they can get help with homework, things like that. And one of the ways that we do that at Dexter McCarty Middle School, as well as several other of the middle schools here in Gresham, is through the Metropolitan Family Service Sun Community Schools. So I'm going to introduce Laura Neely, who is our Sun coordinator here at Dexter, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about some of the programs that we have here.
Hello. Two of the ways that I get kids to come to Sun and out of gangs is that I tell them that Sun is a cool thing to do, and then I bring my significant other who's a Salem police officer, so he comes in and kind of gives them a little kick. Sun program is just an after-school program here in the area. This session alone, we have over 250 kids enrolled in the Sun program, which is, I don't know, up 50 or 60% from the last couple of years. And so what we do, we meet after school 3:35 to 5. We provide a supper for them, and then classes from 4 to 5. So we have chess and gardening. We had a Latin art club, wrestling. We have Miss Stein over there leads a rigorous boot camp. And our students are beating some of the teachers and the I don't know what they're called. Anyway, so we just have a really great time. Sun has kind of become a family. A lot of the teachers this year have talked about how awesome it is. All the students are coming together and being very well behaved and taking care of themselves. And what I try to tell my students is that you just need to make good choices. And I just offer those. I try to offer those choices to those students. And if they make a poor choice, it's the consequence, and then it's I need you to make a better decision next time. So. I think that about wraps it up for the Sun program. Our contact information is up there. Patty Hack is at Clear Creek, and Jared Crowley is over at Gordon Russell. And we also have programs at the grade schools at East Gresham, at Gresham High School. And so you can check all that out. We have a webpage on the McCarty website as well. So are there any questions about Sun?
All right, I'm going to let these guys wrap it up here. But before we do that, if we could give them a round of applause, really thankful that they came out tonight to do this. And after they've wrapped it up, we do have a couple of tables in the back. There's a group called Compassion Connect that works with girls to keep them out of at-risk behaviors. They've got some programs that they're getting some information out about. If you have any questions about the Sun program, you can ask Laura. Principal Garrison, who opened us tonight, can answer any questions from a principal's perspective. And then again, in the back, we do have a table with documentation that we've taken from students in disciplinary action that has been part of the gang, graffiti and other things that we've taken from their person when we've found them on them. So with that, I'm going to let you guys just kind of wrap it up. If there's any other...
That's it. Thanks for coming out. Do you guys have any other questions, anything? We'll be hanging out back here. Go ahead. Oh, what he was referring to is that's the border between Gresham and Portland, 162nd, between Stark and somewhere north of, gets a little weird once you start going north of Halsey. So, okay, thank you.